This is the world's foremost anti-nuclear campaigner.
There is no way you can justify nuclear power. None.
Dr. Helen Caldicott. She's been featured by CNN, The New York Times, CBC, Democracy Now!, 60 Minutes, and C-SPAN. Primetime television audiences would be better served if her appearances included a quick montage of statements she's made to her supporters.
Why even make our children clean their teeth and have immunizations and have a good education when clearly they have no future? More people have died from Chernobyl than in the Black Plague. Japan is, by orders of magnitude, many times worse than Chernobyl. Maybe China's going a little fast, but also the Chinese government is acutely aware of its pollution. It doesn't like nuclear power, and the first chapter deals with the fact that nuclear power produces a substantial amount of global warming gas. In fact, a nuclear power plant will produce the same amount of CO2 in toto as a gas-fired plant, so you may as well just use gas. Yet people like George Monbiot, who write for The Guardian, attack me full frontal, saying I don't know what I'm talking about. I totally agree about overpopulation.
Prosperity is needed to slow population growth. Energy is needed for prosperity.
If you gave me only one wish, I can pick who's president, I can pick a vaccine, which is something I love, or having energy be a quarter as expensive and environmentally friendly, I'd pick the energy. In fact, if you could pick just one thing to lower the price of, to reduce poverty, by far you would pick energy.
We simply cannot live with this kind of population at the technology state we had 200 years ago that the developing world is still at. The notion that the answer to our energy woes is for us all to revert to an agrarian lifestyle would doom roughly 85% of the planet to death.
They need to go back and look at what happened during the Depression, when people had to scavenge food from the natural environment and human beings way outpaced our normal carrying capacity. We've nearly rendered multiple species extinct so we could feed ourselves and our family.
By ignoring nuclear, Caldicott is forced to prescribe a future of energy poverty.
The climate problem requires more than a 90% reduction in CO2 emitted. Every year we're improving our efficiency. Enough poor people are increasing their energy intensity. You're not ever going to get the amount of CO2 emitted to go down.
There are people who are really using very, very little material and very, very little energy. They are so green, and they are so eager to stop being that kind of green. And the main economic and demographic event in the world now is people are getting the hell out of poverty.
Most of the world, especially the developing world, would love to have these things. And frankly, I think we should want them to have these things.
This is a sorting facility. Sorting activities might be the first thing we think of when we hear the word recycle. In developed nations, sorting facilities offer full-time employment. In developing nations, people live on landfills and sell their personally sorted garbage for income. We all sort garbage to some extent, even if it is just to put refundables aside for bottle drives. Sorting is labor-intensive. Recycling is energy-intensive.
We could make energy cheap enough, there's a lot of other products you could make economic to recycle.
Absolutely.
We saw the other day how electrical power was used to make steel from recycled materials. You know, those operations couldn't proceed if they thought in 2 hours they might or might not have power. They would not be able to make steel that way. They have to have reliable energy sources.
We think of coal now as sort of the enemy of the environment, number one, but coal allowed us to stop chopping down forests and using wood as fuel. And coal allowed massive global reforestation.
We would stop going into high-risk areas where extracting oil is environmentally hazardous. We would stop blowing tops off of mountains. And there's all kinds of things we'd stop doing.
Nuclear provides the promise of actually being able to reduce the human impact even further through technology.
We're still going to need liquid fuels for vehicles and machinery, but we could generate these liquid fuels from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and from water, much like nature does. We could generate hydrogen by splitting water and combining it with carbon harvested from CO2 in the atmosphere, making fuels like methanol, ammonia, and dimethyl ether. which could be a direct replacement for diesel fuels.
The whole planet's transportation system is gauged toward the consumption of a fossil fuel. There's an entire internal combustion infrastructure on the planet of fuel delivery, automobile repair, service stations, roads, which is a way of getting the full life cycle out of the infrastructure we've already built up. Because you don't want to just abandon the infrastructure we've already built up. We have trillions of dollars of internal combustion engine machinery around, but we need to at least stop putting more stuff in the air. You can not only halt the increase of CO2 emissions, you can start to reverse what was there and reverse the coming calamity of global warming.
The opportunities abound. I couldn't even tell you. There's so many possibilities.
I don't think people understand. This is a product of annihilation.
That's one very negative way to look at nuclear material. Do we pump your car with gas and go, I just pumped 12 gallons of gas into my car. Do you know how much napalm that would make? No, of course not. I'm gonna get my car, I'm gonna drive 300 miles on it. Take nuclear weapons, take them apart, take the uranium out, burn it up, make electricity. That's a bad thing. Why? You wanna leave it the bomb? What do you wanna do with it?
And so the density, the acreage involved, the watts per square meter of those things, it makes it very hard. You get wind, you get snow, you get, your capital equipment isn't in a coal plant that's protected from the elements. It's large and widespread. So that's very hard. But even if you get past that, there's the intermittency problem. And so if you depend on these sources, you have to have some way of getting energy during those time periods that it's not available.
During the day, we generate as much electricity as we can using solar. At night, and when it's cloudy, we use more natural gas. Each year, we probably get over 200 days of sunshine, but there's 165 more days without. As big as this solar plant is, it's not enough to meet our customers' needs. The plant operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That's why we need natural gas.
The plants that we're building, the wind plants and the solar plants, are gas plants. You need to put them next to a natural gas pipe. But once we build a national grid, we don't have to do that because the wind in this country blows at night and the solar, everybody knows this, shines during the day. So, and those two will balance each other out, but you can't do that without
if we rebuild the entire electrical grid of the United States.
You have 2-week periods in the desert where you get no sun at all. Likewise, the wind doesn't blow all the time. All the types of batteries that get made for cars, for computers, for phones, for flashlights, for everything, could store less than 10 minutes of all the energy. We need a big breakthrough here, something that's going to be a factor of 100 better than the approaches we have now.
We can't just try to put all our eggs in the basket of wind and solar and hope for the best. Or if it doesn't pan out, it's not going to be a pretty world.
We kind of go solar, it's so clean. There's protests in China over pollution from solar plants.
In China's Zhejiang province in Haining City, over 500 villagers stormed a solar panel manufacturing company, overturning vehicles and destroying offices.
This is what a silicon solar cell looks like. Now, solid silicon processing involves the use or release of the following chemicals: phosphine, arsenic, arsenine, trichloroethane, phosphorus oxychloride, ethyl vinyl acetate, silicon trioxide, stannic chloride, tantalum pentoxide, lead, and hexavalent chromium. Even the newer thin film technologies that we see coming online contain cadmium, which is considered an extreme toxin by the EPA. Solar cell manufacturing plants are one of the largest emitters of these three greenhouse gases: hexafluoroethane, nitrogen trifluoride, and sulfur hexafluoride. These are used to make solar cells, and they make CO2 look harmless. These greenhouse gases are man-made. They are 10,000 to 25,000 times more virulent than CO2, according to the IPCC. The solar photovoltaic industry is one of the leading and fastest growing emitters of these gases. Now, what do we do with this at the end of its life? If we incinerate it, that stuff goes into the air, and that's no good. If we bury it, we inevitably end up in the groundwater supply. And none of this stuff biodegrades, leaving us with the same type of predicament that we have with nuclear waste.
There's no free lunch. There is always a cost-benefit analysis that needs to be done. Always. There's no such thing as a waste-free energy source.
Measurements were taken in Ireland where they were expecting a 12% reduction in CO2 from the wind farm's presence, but in reality, they only observed a 3% reduction. The reason is that the fossil fuels that had to back them up had generators that had to start and stop, and that causes more fuel to be consumed. By analogy, cars have mileages of, say, 20 miles per gallon for city driving and 30 miles per gallon for highway driving.
Most positive press coverage on energy farming technologies focus on deployment, focus on generating capacity. How much carbon-free electricity was generated during the latest optimal conditions? Neither of these articles include any numbers at all about greenhouse gases. If you added up the impact of all the various greenhouse gases used to produce electricity in Germany, there was a moment in the middle of 2005 where it was equivalent to an annual output of 1,000 metric tons of CO2. A nice round number, 1,000 metric tons of global warming badness. Since then, German greenhouse gas emissions have fallen to the equivalent of 951 metric tons of CO2 annually. That's a 5% reduction in annual greenhouse gas emissions. During that same period, the percentage of German electricity being produced by renewables went from 10.5% to 23.5%, an increase of 13%. Germany only achieved a 5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, even though Germans are generating an additional 13% of their electricity from renewables. This is partially because of inefficiencies caused by sporadically burning fossil fuel to back up intermittent renewables, but mostly because Germany is shutting down its nuclear power plants and replacing them with coal plants to meet its energy needs.
I mean, Germany's going to be 80% renewables very soon. Germany.
Soon? If the percentage of electricity generated by renewables continues to expand at the current rate, it will take just over 40 years for renewables to generate 80% of German electricity. Maybe by 80%, Caldecott meant peak load. It doesn't matter what day German renewable peak load finally reaches 80%, any more than it matters what percentage of German electricity comes from renewables.
The German energy turnaround is so costly that the question of allocation of those costs comes to the top of the agenda.
You're all fools. What do you think you're doing? I mean, you all need psychoanalysis. These people are long-term murderers. They know they are.